Hello, my name is Ian, and this is the story of one of the biggest visual effects mistakes I've ever made. Almost a year ago now, I had a bunch of friends over, we were going to make a movie. I had a lot planned, and it was just going to be one day that we were able to shoot.
On something that you should be pulling on.
Definitely not.
Isn't that a gas line? That is a gas line.
What the heck? What was the plan here?
So immediately with that comes all sorts of jitters and hoping the weather is going to be alright, and hoping everybody can make it, and hoping the story works out. So many things to keep track of, and with all of my divided attention, something I forgot to think about was the settings on the camera.
Somebody shot me in the butt!
I should grab my gun when we burst into the
And I actually have it over here. Let's see. This little guy, Lumix G7, which is really nice. That's a good starter camera. What happened was, we had started in 30 frames per second. I saw a shot and I thought, this would look really cool in slow motion. So I cranked the camera settings up to 60 frames per second and promptly forgot about it for the rest of the shoot. So at this point we have a problem where the first part of the movie is shot in 30 frames per second and the second part is shot in 60 frames per second. Thankfully this was pretty early on that I made this mistake, so most of it was actually in 60 frames per second. So that's good. The problem happened when I completely forgot that as you turn up your frames per second, you want to make your shutter speed faster. And my poor little Lumix G7 was not ready to handle this mistake. So what happened, instead of actually getting 60 frames per second, was I got about 30 frames per second, but it doubled each frame. So each frame has a duplicate, and so it seems like it's 60 frames per second, but it's only 30. Now you might be asking, what the heck does this have to do with visual effects? Well, a lot. So the problem that I had to deal with in post was that I had these duplicate frames that I didn't know what to do with. If I was trying to track a camera, I would track one frame, track its duplicate frame, move on to the next frame, track that duplicate frame, and it was terrible. When I played it back, it didn't look terrible, but when I had things like masks that I wanted to animate, for the first frame, it would be steady, and then it would move for the duplicate frame, and then it would move for the next frame, and then it would move for that frame's duplicate frame. It was such a mess. Thankfully, I managed to work through it. I'm sure it doesn't look the best. With the start of the movie that was filmed in 30 frames per second, I actually had to slow it down to 60 frames, which looked terrible, but I've learned. And so here are two things that I'm making sure that I do so this never happens again, and hopefully this helps you to not make the same mistake. So, first of all, just practicing with my camera. I know it doesn't have a lot to do with visual effects, but down the road you will be so thankful that you know what your settings on your camera do. My failure was to not practice with 30 frames per second and 60 frames and work on visual effects with each. If I had done that before, it could have been a different story and a lot easier for me down the road. Now since then, I've upgraded my camera. The new camera that I'm working with actually has another control for the shutter angle, and so I can set the shutter angle rather than the shutter speed. And it gets a little bit technical. I don't really completely understand how it works, but basically, if you have your shutter angle at 180 degrees, then the camera will automatically set the shutter speed to the frames per second that you're using. And that will completely negate that problem with the double frames. So yeah, those are two things that I'm practicing and using now to make sure I never get this problem again, because that would stink. I hope you found this story useful. I hope you put these two practices into place. And on a slightly more related visual effects note, I've recently created an asset pack of smoke elements that are completely free. These can be super useful for adding life into your scene, and if you'd like to pick these up, there's a link in the description, so go ahead and check those out. Now, in addition to that, if you're interested in learning a bit more about the visual effects shots that I put into place on this short film, you can check them out here and here. And yeah, I hope you have an excellent day. Cheers!